1963 movie The Servant, directed by Joseph Losey, starring Dirk, Bogarde, Wendy Craig, and that's the third one that's just escaped me. Oh dear me. The screenplay's by Hal Pinter. Early frames. Bogarde arrives at an address. He's got an appointment for the job as the manservant. The host is recuperating from too much beer at the lunchtime pub venue. The appointment's for 3. The servant's on time. Hugh, Bogarde's character presents as very super efficient but cunning, manipulative, sly, manoeuvring Fox into the direction that he wants. The art of persuasion. Neat camera work using the mirror to get a sort of reflection, distorted, nice touch. Susan enters the fray. She's the fiancée. It's clear Barrett, played by Bogarde, is scheming. You can sense it in his eye. After he delivers impeccable service, he then sloops off to be on his own, and is clearly not relaxed. There's a great jazz score by Johnny Danquith, lots of horns and woodwinds and sax. Beautiful. Of course, with Johnny Danquith on the music score, it wasn't long before we'd start hearing Cleo Lane. Of course, they're married. They were married. I think they're both dead now, but fantastic jazz. Barrett oversteps the mark, coming into the room, darkened room, when Fox and Craig are into petting. She's not amused. Barrett's position as the servant is the subject of increasing increasing antagonism between Craig and Fox. She clearly can't stand him, and Fox is quite defensive about the fact that the servant enables him to have a lazy lifestyle, and so he's more tolerant of the indiscretions. Vera is Barrett's described as shrill tart acquaintance, but he passes her off as his sister and gets her hired as a maid. So that now there's the two of them, and he's slowly, with his tentacles, enclosing himself. They start to abuse their position. The so-called sister stroke tart already helped herself to Tony's bathroom, even though there's one for the workers upstairs, and he's certainly put out by it. Barrett then decides to match her behaviour by having his own bath in his master's bathroom, and there's some semi-nudity, hardly bursting the censor, but you know what I mean. 1963. Barrett seems intent on using his tart friend to try and maybe seduce Tony. and he's obviously got some unscrupulous plan up his street, and so the so-called need to go to see the mother overnight is aborted for the sister, who comes back to the house alone. Phone rings. He allows it to ring. She then starts to develop her script, her actress piece, suggesting it's rather hot, and sits up on a table, I think, in quite a posy way. He moves closer. Tony and Vera clearly got their rocks off. Barrett comes back, and he now sends him on an errand, attempting to cover up what he seems to fail to realise, that it was all set up by Barrett. Fox appears to be besotted with Vera, and Barrett shows a pretentiousness which indicates totally disregards what's going on. It's a great sort of disguise. Vera moves from one situation in the bedroom with Barrett to the second one involving Tony. Susan has got wind of the situation. She decides to take the bulls by the horns, and she moves in, much to the disgust of Barrett. I like the attention to detail with these black and white films. There's a sitting room with lots of furniture and mantelpiece and various bits and bobs all around. Creates a great deal of character. Susan is lauding her position as the master's woman and ordering her around, treating like a servant. Susan almost has a disdain for, a contempt for Barrett, and she shows it with her sort of commanding, do this, do that, and it's possibly a intention by Pinter to clarify the upper middle classes versus the downtrodden working classes, and how the gap can only exist in this sort of structured relationship of employer-employee. She personally insults him by asking him, does he use a deodorant, and commenting, does it mix well with the environment. The cat's away, the mice will play. Tony and Susan return to the flat in London after a brief weekend with the aristocracy. Susan's parents are a huge sort of place, and it's clear that his liberal way, Tony, is being abused by Bogart, Barrett and Vera. Tony half climbs the stairs, eavesdropping. Susan waiting for him to react, to go in and confront, but he just hasn't got the stomach for it. We see a shadow of Barrett. I assume he's naked, and Tony somewhat transfixed, so there's a sort of inference of homosexual desire, perhaps, as he turns and puts his face against the wall. Barrett is told to come down by Tony. He's getting ready for his style of confrontation. Asks for an explanation and assumes that Barrett's been honest about the fact that the woman is his sister, when of course she hasn't. And furthermore, Barrett is aware that Vera has been fraternising with Tony, and Susan's standing there, so effectively holds something over him. Tony eventually tells him to get out after Vera has shared toward her fraternising with Tony. Fidelity rears its head. Susan leaves. Tony can't persuade her to stay. The other two are out on the streets, and they soften their blow in some sort of drinking house. Sorry, mistaken. Actually, it's the following day, and Tony is in a drinking house, catching a glance from a young woman who's drinking a low, who looks more like she's on the game. The absence of Susan, the absence of Hugo, the absence of Vera. Tony not at his best in terms of looking after his flat, and it soon falls into disrepute. Tony, Barrett, in the same bar. There's another guy between them who's jabbering on about his bad day. Hugo then starts spouting on about the fact that he was besotted by Vera, and she took him for a sucker, trying to suggest that he's innocent. Curry in favour. He turns it on its head, Hugo, by suggesting that he was completely unaware of Vera's amorous gestures towards Tony. Anyway, we move on, and Hugo's back on the job, so to speak, but he's moaning about the state with which Tony's leaving the place in. They're at each other's throats now. One suspects that the relationship has become more of lover rather than the clear distinction between employer and employee, and it's falling around their ankles. Alcoholism has obviously crept in, and possibly drug taking, but this scene between the two is the most powerful in the movie. Hilarious games while high as kites. It's must be some form of did I spot heroin? It's developed into a sort of affectionate horseplay between two young men. This is quite daring for its time. They're clearly both homosexual. In this phase of the movie, this sort of hide and seek style, where you can catch the glint in their eyes, the lighting and the black and white is absolutely superb. Susan appears. Clearly there's been a lot of water passed under the bridge, but now the arrangement has changed. Barrett is more assertive and tells her to clear out. Him and Tony are lovers, and they're also junkies together. It's Vera, not Susan. Vera tries to get back on the right side of Tony. This triangle now of deceit, both of them playing with Tony's feelings. What's interesting, Lucy's direction, is that If you contrast the early part of the movie when the closeted homosexual Tony was going through the motions of sort of an intimate relationship with Susan, and he was very passive and accommodating, and now we've moved into this homosexual relationship where emotions are much more out front and much more volatile and aggressive. Tony is now clearly an alcoholic, and Barrett, Hugo, after a period of sobriety, tempts him with some liquor, whiskey, and he tries to resist but eventually caves in. Tony appears almost anaesthetised. Is it the alcohol or is it heroin? But Susan appears and he's almost comatose in his response, whereas Hugo is quite normal, excited. Maybe he's thinking about the possibility of inheriting the fortune when Tony kicks the bucket. A small party is assembled in the house. They're all women and they all look like they're on the game. And Susan is witnessing this with Tony sort of almost comatose, and Hugo, like the MC, but with a sort of laughable, eerie giggle. Hauntingly, Susan is transfixed almost by Hugo, and eventually they clinch and mouth meets mouth. The scene develops almost into an orgy of debauchery. Then Tony flicks switch and he becomes extremely aggressive and insists that everybody leaves. Hugo accommodates that and removes all the women and tells Susan to leave as well. The closing frames really sort of moral decay as such, and the servant has changed places with the master, but Tony is incapable of being a servant and he just wallows in a drug and alcohol induced state 24/7.